guys? Marcellus Williams, aka TheSwolefessor, here to educate you on health, fitness, social well-being. And today, guys, we're going to be talking about how to properly progress on weighted calisthenics. Now, you guys just saw me hit an all-time PR of 225 pounds on weighted dips at a body weight of 167.8 pounds. You guys also know that my best chin up is 200 pounds. Barely made it. Barely got my chin right above the bar. Gonna probably be doing that again sometime, in the next few months. Either that or I'm trying to beat it and make sure the reps are a lot cleaner, just because a lot of you were questioning your boy on if he actually got it or not. But anyway, that's beside the point. So you guys obviously know that I have very strong, weighted dip and weighted pull up. Regardless of body weight, I think that's one thing that everyone collectively agree on, is that those are two moves that I'm very, very strong on. The thing is, a lot of you have asked me different questions that relate to calisthenics in general. And I've done a few videos for calisthenics already. I'll have those links in the description down below. Specifically, the one I recommend you guys checking out is my video over the 5 most common questions I get about calisthenics. I would check that out before you actually finish watching this video, just so you're kind of caught up on calisthenics in general before you kind of get into specifically weighted pull-ups, weighted dips, how you progress and get better at those movements. Now, assuming you've done that, let's get right into it. The first thing, guys, is this. We want to make sure that you have an established base with calisthenics first. A lot of people, they just jump right into weighted dips, they jump right into weighted pull-ups, and even though that can work in a sense, some people are able to just start off doing pull-ups with a little bit of weight, just depending on either how strong they kind of are naturally, or if they're a little bit lighter naturally, they're able to do that, right? But the thing is, one, you can get a lot of benefit as far as building actual strength by first and foremost just mastering the movement with your body weight alone. And two, you're gonna be able to put on a little bit of muscle mass with it too, because you're just building up your total workload. And what I mean by that, if you're somebody, for example, who can, you can barely do 3 sets of 5, either pull-ups or dips with your body weight, well, that means you have a lot of room for growth with that movement with just your body weight alone. Building it up to something as simple as 3 sets of 10, that's doubling, your total volume right there, just from going from doing sets of 5 to sets of 10. So you have a lot of room for growth. And what I often find, guys, is people who are decent, I'm not even gonna say good, but decent with their body weight, where maybe you can, bust out sets of 5, 6 reps with your body weight, then you immediately try to put weight on. Usually their form just goes to complete crap. They start doing, developing a lot of bad habits with the weight, doing all kinds of crazy stuff to try to get themselves up with the weight, just because they didn't have a real mastery of the movement with just their body weight to begin with. So the first thing I suggest doing is establishing that base. You guys have to keep in mind, I'm not even talking about comparing yourself to me, because keep in mind, from age 11 to 17, so for 6 years before I even touched weighted pull-ups or weighted dips or started lifting weights at age 17, I've been doing calisthenics for 6 years. So I had a really good established base already. So it was easy for me to take a 45 and throw it on for pull-ups and dips and start there and start building it up, just because I had a really good mastery of the movement. So what I suggest to you guys is get to the point where you can perform 50 reps in a given session on both the pull-ups and the dips, between between the minimum of 1 and a maximum of 5 sets, be able to get 50 pull-ups and 50 dips. So what do I mean by that? So either you're able to, at best, bust out a set of 50 dips or 50 pull-ups in 1 set, or at worst, you can get 5 sets of 10. Now, a lot of you may be wondering oh, well, why not something that's 3 sets of 10? Because I have said that before. I said, hey, if you're able to do 3 sets of 10, pull-ups or dips with sufficient weight, with sufficient form, you can just go ahead and start adding weight, add 5 pounds and build it back up. But the thing is, guys, once again, if we're looking at total workload, if you're able to do, 50 reps in a given session with from 1 to 5 sets, then that means you're either able to do sets of 50, or at a minimum sets of 10, 5 sets of 10. Or even if you're somebody where you get 30, 20, 10, whatever. The point is, with that spectrum, I believe you have a very good foundation with that movement, because it's like anything else. If you're able to do 5 sets of 10 with 135 pounds on bench press, you're probably good to go as far as adding weight to that, right? Same thing with squats, deadlifts, whatever the movement may be. So what this is gonna do, or what this tells me, if you're able to already do 50 reps, whether it's 1 set of 50 or 5 sets of 10 with proper form, that you have a very good strength base and mastery with that movement, to where now adding 5 pounds isn't gonna suddenly take you from sets of 10 to oh, I can only get 5 sets of 2 with this weight, which is what tends to happen with a lot of you, because you can only do maybe 3 sets of some arm trainer 5 or 6 reps. You add a little bit of weight and suddenly your reps drop significantly. So what this is going to allow you to do is have a very strong established base. So that's the first thing I always recommend, making sure that you can, with a full range of motion, get 50 pull-ups or 50 dips, or both, depending on, like, you know, which movement you're trying to work on. If you're able to do that, then I think you're able to start adding weight without having to worry about, like, you know, your rep scheme dropping that much. Now from that point, you want to basically use linear progression, because the thing is, it's almost like any other movement, guys. When you get to a point where you start like adding weight, think about any movement you first start, usually like it's almost like beginner gains. Whenever you do a movement you've never done before, right? You get really strong in the movement really fast just due to neural adaptations, things like that. So with that being the case, it's the same thing. If you get to the point where you're able to do, like, you know, 5 sets of 10, or you can just bust out like 50 pull-ups and you start adding weight, you're gonna just do the same thing. Get to where you can do, at that point, you can like change your sets and reps up a little bit. If you decide, hey, I want to just focus on getting really heavy with this movement, you can do something like 3 sets of 5. If you want a little bit more volume with the movement, 3 sets of 10. Either way, just decide your sets and rep ranges. Every time you complete all reps with all sets, you'll add weight next time. And you should be able to add weight at first pretty consistently, you know, for at least a few weeks, right? Kind of milk your linear progression with that. Then you'll eventually get to the point where, you know, I've been stuck on this weight for a little bit. And that's where you can start periodizing it and start proper programming with the movements, the same way you would for anything else, guys. That's the thing, as I've said before on this channel, people treat weighted pull-ups and weighted dips like it's like this really crazy magical movement, but it's really no different than, like, you know, the bench press or the squat or the dip, in the terms of the fact that you can still program for it. You can still periodize it, whether you use linear periodization, where you start with more volume, lower intensity. As the intensity goes up, the volume goes down, or you want to do concurrent, which is how I prefer to have it set up, where you maybe have like a volume day, an intensity day, or you just want to do some other type of daily undulating periodization. However you choose to program it, that's the thing. If you want to get better at a movement, you have to actually program it. Just coming in and doing it whenever for how many random sets and reps and just hoping you do well with it isn't going to cut it at a certain point. And it's just not a smart way of training in general. You want to make sure that you're programming for the movements that you want to get good at, especially if it's one of the main movements you want to focus on. Like, let's say you're not a power lifter where you're not focused on the big 3, you just say, hey, I want to get really strong weighted pull-ups and weighted dips. Well, that means that you should be able to program it to where maybe you have a frequency of, like, you know, 3 to 4 times a week with that movement. Maybe you can have like an intensity day, you can have a volume day, you can have a variation day, things like that. Now, if it's a movement you're trying to get better on, but it's not your main focus, it's more of like an accessory movement, then doing it 1 to 2 times a week makes sense. And in that case, I would just have, like, you know, a volume day and an intensity day. With the volume day, that can be something like 3 sets of 5, 3 sets of 3, 5 sets of 3, or 5 sets of 5. But if it's like intensity focused, hopefully I said intensity. If I said volume at first, I'm talking about intensity. But if it's intensity focused, you don't want to really do more than 5 sets and don't do any more than 5 reps. That's plenty for trying to, you know, get sufficiently like heavy weight on that day. Then on your volume day, that's when you can do something more like, you know, 3 sets of 10, or even 3 sets of 8 to 12. You can start with the weight, get 3 sets of 8, then, you know, build it to 3 sets of 12, then increase. Or you can just do what I like to do, have a standard, like, you know, 3 or 4 sets of 10, something like that. And whenever you get all reps on all sets, you increase it. So you'll have a heavier day and you'll have a lighter day. And then if you're somewhere you throw in like a variation day, that's when you can do things like, you know, pauses. You can do like pause dips at the bottom, dead hang chin ups where you're fully extended, pausing at the bottom. Or if you're somewhere you're focused on the chin up, your variation can just be a pull up for that day, or vice versa. If you're focused on the pull up, your variation can be a different, you know, it can be the chin up or a different version of the pull up. If you're mainly doing like, you know, the standard pull up, you can do a wider grip pull up that day, or you can do a chin up, or you can do palm spacing, more of a hammer grip pull up. So those are different things you can do, guys. Like this isn't so much a video about like just programming in of itself, because like I said, the same principles pretty much apply to most movements across the board. Depending on how you set up your programming, you would do the same thing for your pull-ups and dips. This is more talking about like what you want to do when you kind of like, you know, to build the base and start progressing with your weighted calisthenics. Now, a big thing that people seem to really get confused on is like, okay, well, how do I take into consideration like my weight? And the thing is, guys, you don't want to overthink this. You pretty much want to treat it the same way you would your other movements, meaning how do you gauge your progression on your squat or your deadlift? You gauge it by the fact that you are gradually adding weight to the bar. It's the same thing with weighted pull-ups or dips. You gauge your progression based on the fact that you're gradually adding weight to, like, you know, the dip belt or the pull-up belt, whatever you want to call it, the belt, the chain. That's the same thing, guys. You want to do the exact same thing. Now, mind you, does our body weight have an impact on what we can lift? Yes. In the same way that most people who tend to be heavier can, you know, squat more and, you know, deadlift more, it's kind of the same thing, but a little bit in reverse. Meaning, okay, so with the pull-ups and the dips, if you are gradually adding like weight to your frame, right? Like body weight, but it's like very gradual and it's muscle mass and you're staying consistent with the movement, that tends to actually help you. Even though you weigh a bit more, it's gonna actually help you with the weighted pulls and weighted dips. Why? Because since you're doing it very gradually and the way very gradually, you're staying consistent with the movement and the way you're adding is muscle mass, it's gonna help you to produce more total force, which is gonna help you be stronger on your weighted dips and your weighted pull-ups. Now, if you're adding weight very quickly, and we already know, you guys know based off my videos for lean bulk and anything like that, you can only build so much muscle at a time. So if you're just gaining like, 1 pound, 2 pounds every week, of course, quite a bit of that's going to end up being fat. And since it's fat, that's not extra muscle mass, it's gonna help you produce more force. So you're just gonna be heavier. So in a way, you are still sort of progressing if you're kind of maintaining like the same weight you have on like the dip belt itself, but your weight's going up. You are technically kind of progressing because your total weight that you're moving is more. However, it's just not as optimally beneficial because you're not gonna be able to progress as well as you want with the actual weight on the belt. Why? Well, because you're gonna feel slowed down and weighed down from all the extra body weight you're carrying, especially if it's fat. Whereas if you're cutting, the opposite is gonna be true. So if you're cutting, you want to, still same thing, you wanna take your cut very slowly, but for the opposite reason. Why? Well, if we take it more slowly, we're gonna hold on to more muscle mass, right? Which is, once again, we want more muscle mass to produce more force, to move more weight with the movement. But by taking it slowly, we're also gonna, burn fat as well while holding on to our muscle mass. Because if you start cutting too fast and too aggressively, yes, you'll burn fat, but then you'll also burn muscle mass as well. So at first you may feel like, oh, I can do way more reps, with the weight now because I'm lighter. But then as you start losing muscle mass, you don't feel as strong, and then you might see that the weight you're able to do on your weighted pulls and dips actually goes down as well. And that's the same thing with any other movement, right? Like if it's the bench press, the squat, or the deadlift, like if you start gaining weight, we tend to see those lifts go up. If you start, losing weight, we tend to see those lifts go down. So it's the same thing as far as your body weight does play a factor into, kind of like what you're able to do. But when we're talking about like relative to yourself, it's still the same goal. You want to focus on gradually building muscle, but not having that much fat on you, because that is going to hinder you and affect the way that you're able to perform as far as the lifts. But the thing is, you don't want to be one of these people where it's like, oh well, yeah, I haven't added any type of weight to, the actual weighted dip or weighted pull-up itself, but I've just been gaining a bunch of weight, so it's still like progression, right? Well, not really. Like that's not how you look at the squat, right? If your squat max is 405 pounds and you gain 10 more pounds, right, of body weight, and you squat 405 pounds again, you're not gonna call that a PR. You're not gonna be like, oh, I weigh 10 pounds more, so I'm technically lifting more weight, because you are. Because keep in mind, squats and deadlifts are by nature calisthenic movements as well. Why? Because your body is moving through space as well, the same way with pull-ups and dips, but you're not considering that a PR. So the way I gauge progression with my weighted pulls and weighted dips is the same way I do with all my other movements. Am I gradually adding more weight? Now, if I'm able to, be a little bit heavier, but still continue to add more weight, then yeah, sure, that's cool. And that's the thing, guys, when it comes to like, your body weight to the weight you're moving as far as relative strength, that's great. And that's great for comparing, different individuals to each other. That's why we have weight classes, right? Whereas like, the squat would be more favored by people who are heavier. In this case, something like, weighted pull-up or weighted dip may be more favored by people who are lighter, or at least the weighted pull-up. The weighted dip, not as much, but the weighted pull-up, usually people who weigh a little bit less tend to be able to do a little bit more with weighted pull-ups, just because it's like if you weigh 150 pounds, right, and then you add 100 pounds, that's 250 pounds that you're moving. But if there's a dude who weighs 250 pounds and he's moving 100 pounds as well, it's a little bit more impressive. Why? Well, because he's technically moving 350 pounds because he already weighs 250 to begin with. Whereas, with something like the squat, it would be the opposite. If two people are squatting 405, the lighter guy is going to be seen as a little bit more impressive. So relative strength is great for comparing people one to another, but in terms of your own progression, you want to focus on that absolute strength, how much weight you're actually adding to the dip belt itself for your dips or your pull-ups. But that's what it comes down to, guys. You want to first and foremost have a good established base. Like I said, 50 reps minimum is a great way to start, because even if you're not able to do that yet, that's fine. As you build up to that, you're building strength and you're going to build muscle mass with that as well, when you get to the point where you can do 50 reps either in one set or no more than 5 sets. Well, from that point, you just start adding weight and linear progress as long as you can. And then once you can anymore, you start periodizing it. You start programming for it, whether you're using RPE or percentages of your max, or you're doing something like, concurrent style where you have like volume and intensity days, which you guys have seen me do on this channel before. Now, the one thing I will say, guys, is that you have to be way more careful with your consistency on these movements compared to other movements. And what I mean by that And this is pretty much the last point that I really want to hit on, is that, okay, with the bench press, what is the standard? You have to come all the way down, touch your chest, and come all the way up. So no matter how much weight you probably, you're gaining or losing, that's pretty much the standard. So it's easy to focus on, hey, come all the way down, come all the way up for it to count. And the same way where if you start adding weight to the bench press, but you start getting to the point where you're only coming halfway down, you're not coming down as much, it doesn't mean anything anymore. You're not really progressively overloading. Yes, you're adding weight to the bar, but you're not actually getting stronger because you're not doing the same total amount of work, because you're not going through the same range of motion. This is especially true for your weighted dips and your weighted pull-ups. Because the weight gets heavier, people will have a tendency where they don't even realize, whereas before you used to go to like, full 90 degrees on your dips, or maybe you're somewhere like me where you can go a little bit lower than that, you start going like, oh, not quite as low. Why? Because the weight's heavier and it's harder, and you get this habit where you're adding more weight, but you're not really doing the same total work. And then when you add in the fact that your body weight can fluctuate as well, it just makes it even harder to be consistent with what you're doing if you're not going through the same range of motion. Same thing with your pull-ups. If you're somewhere where you're coming all the way down, arms fully extended, and all the way up, and you get to the point where you're kind of just doing this halfway stuff, it makes it a lot more difficult to be consistent with programming for the movement. That's why it's a lot easier with something like, the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, because the prescribed range of motion is pretty much, set for most people. But you could even do the same, making the same mistakes with the squat though. How often do we see people at first, they're getting good depth, they're breaking parallel, but then as the weight on the bar goes up, their depth starts becoming more and more shallow to where they're not even going parallel anymore. So it's pretty much the same thing. That's why I like using the squat and deadlifts as examples, because the way you program for them is very similar as to how you program for your pull-ups and dips, because those are calisthenic movements as well. But you notice people don't tend to overthink those movements the way they do pull-ups and dips. They just think, okay, I'll just periodize it and program it. It's the same thing you do, guys, with your weighted pull-ups and dips. I've gotten to the point I'm at now because I've spent adequate time actually building a base of calisthenics first and foremost. Like I said, I did it for 6 years. I'm not telling you guys to do that, but once again, that 50 reps minimum, that's a good base built on either the pull-ups or the dips. And then from there, I simply focused on progressive overload. Every time I was able to get, 3 sets of 10 or 3 sets of 5 on my heavier day, I would simply add weight and keep building it up that way. And when I got to the point where I couldn't be like, linear with it, I started periodizing things, started throwing in some variation work, different things to help me get better at the movement. But the most important thing is building a base. If you jump right into these movements and you don't have a strong base build, you're gonna hit a wall really fast and then find that you have to end up kind of backtracking and building a base anyway. But yeah, that's it for this video, guys. Hope it helped you guys out. Hope it was enjoyable. If it was, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Let me know that it was. If it was not, leave a comment down below. Let me know what I can do to get better. Like the video, share, subscribe. Keep it simple, specific, scientific. I'll catch y'all later.